No allowance this month. I'm done being controlled. I want a divorce. Ryan Mitchell hit send on that text, leaned back in his chair at one of Chicago's most expensive restaurants, and smiled at the woman sitting across from him, a woman who was not his wife, while his wife's credit card sat warm in his jacket pocket. He had spent 3 years living inside Lauren Mitchell's money, her reputation, her company, her name. And now he was using her card to fund a dinner with another woman while sending her a threat he believed would finally bring her to her knees. Then her reply arrived. He read it once. The smile disappeared completely. I already divorced you yesterday. Before we go any further, if this story already has your blood boiling, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Lauren Mitchell had been awake since 4 in the morning. Not because of anxiety, not because of fear. She had trained herself over the years to wake up early and simply sit with the silence before the rest of the world demanded anything from her. She would pour herself a cup of coffee, stand by the window of whatever hotel room or rented apartment she happened to be staying in, and just breathe. Just exist for a few minutes without anyone needing something from her. That particular morning, she was standing in the living room of her brand new apartment on Michigan Avenue. She had signed the lease 2 days before. The movers were scheduled for the following week. Right now, the apartment was almost completely empty, just a folding chair she had brought from her office, a coffee maker she had bought the previous afternoon, and the view of Lake Michigan stretching out beyond the glass like something from a painting. She had not told Ryan about the apartment. She had not told Ryan about a lot of things lately. Lauren was 43 years old. She was the founder and CEO of Mitchell Financial Consulting, a firm that managed portfolios for high-net-worth clients across Illinois, Wisconsin, and Ohio. She had built that company from nothing. She had started it in a 1-bedroom apartment with a laptop, 3 clients, and the inheritance her father had left her after he passed away 6 years ago. Her father had been a factory worker who saved every dollar like it was his last. He had left Lauren enough to start something real. She had promised him standing at his graveside that she would not waste it. She had kept that promise, mostly. The firm now employed over 60 people. She had a reputation in Chicago's financial community that took years to build and could not be purchased. People respected her because she had earned it the hard way, through long days and longer nights and decisions that kept her up until 3 in the morning, wondering whether she had made the right call. She was good at what she did. She was less good, it turned out, at seeing the truth about the man she had married. Her phone buzzed on the folding chair beside her. She picked it up without hurrying. She assumed it was her assistant Marcus confirming a morning meeting. Or maybe it was Rachel, her attorney, following up on the paperwork they had filed the previous day. She looked at the screen. The message was from Ryan, and the moment she read it, something inside her went very, very still. No allowance this month. I'm done being controlled. I want a divorce. Lauren read it twice. Then she set the phone down on the chair and looked back out at the lake. The sun was just beginning to come up, turning the water a pale shade of gold and orange. It was the kind of morning that reminded Lauren of being 12 years old, riding her bicycle to the park near her family's house and watching the world wake up before anyone expected anything from her. She had loved mornings like that. She had not felt like that in years. She picked up the phone again. She typed her reply slowly, deliberately. I already divorced you yesterday. She hit send. Then she poured herself another cup of coffee and watched the sunrise. She did not cry. She did not call anyone. She did not feel the desperate, hollow panic she had expected to feel for so long. She felt for the first time in 3 years like herself. Across the city, approximately 4 miles west and 12 floors up, in a restaurant called Verona that served $20 cocktails and entrees that Lauren had paid for on at least 6 separate occasions. Ryan Mitchell read the reply from his wife and felt the blood drain slowly out of his face. He read it again. I already divorced you yesterday. What's wrong? The woman sitting across from him leaned forward. Her name was Natalie Brooks. She was 29 years old, had 40,000 Instagram followers, described herself online as a lifestyle creator and entrepreneur, and had been the reason Lauren's world began to unravel when Lauren first discovered her name 3 months ago. Ryan did not answer immediately. Ryan, Natalie's voice sharpened. What happened? He turned the phone slowly so she could read the screen. Natalie stared at it. She's bluffing, Natalie said. She has to be bluffing. Ryan said nothing, because somewhere deep in the part of himself he had spent years refusing to examine honestly, Ryan Mitchell already knew that Lauren never bluffed. He had learned that the hard way. The truth about Ryan Mitchell was that he was a brilliant student of people. Not in the way that made you a good person, not in the way that made you a loyal partner or a trustworthy friend. He was brilliant in the way that certain predators are brilliant not through brute force, but through patience and observation, and knowing exactly which door to try before anyone else noticed he was standing in the hallway. He had grown up watching his mother work 2 jobs while his father made promises that never arrived. He had decided very young that promises were currency, and the right promise at the right moment could open any door. He had tested this theory throughout his 20s, moving through relationships and social circles with a careful, practiced confidence that made people feel chosen simply by being in the same room as him. He had met Lauren at a charity gala for a children's hospital. She had been standing slightly apart from the rest of the crowd, nursing a glass of white wine and looking like she was doing mental math on something. He had noticed immediately that she did not dress to impress. Her outfit was tasteful, but not extravagant. She did not wear jewelry that screamed. She was the kind of wealthy that did not announce itself. He had introduced himself by asking her what she thought the most underrated investment sector was. Most women he approached at events like that would have laughed nervously or deflected. Lauren had looked at him calmly and said, "Agricultural commodities. Most people are sleeping on water scarcity." Ryan had not known enough about commodities to argue with her, but he had known in that moment that he was looking at something he needed to get closer to. He had been charming and curious and disarmingly self-deprecating. He told her he was in between projects, which was true. He told her he had ideas about starting a consulting firm of his own, which was not exactly true, but was not exactly a lie. Either he had thought about it occasionally. He told her he admired ambition in women because he had grown up watching his mother work harder than any man he had ever known. That last part had been calculated, and it had worked. Lauren Mitchell, who had spent her adult professional life being viewed as cold or calculating or difficult by men who could not keep up with her, had found herself disarmed by a man who seemed to see her clearly and like what he saw. 4 months after that gala, Ryan moved into her home. She told herself it made sense because he was in between leases and she had more space than she needed. She told herself it was practical. Ryan told everyone they were partners building something together. What actually happened over the months that followed was something much quieter and much more deliberate. Ryan began with small things, a comment here and there about how much he appreciated her support while he was getting his footing. A request to use her spare credit card for business expenses he would absolutely pay back. A suggestion that they put one of her company's car leases in his name since he was running errands for the firm anyway. Every time Lauren raised an eyebrow or asked a question, Ryan would tilt his head slightly and say quietly, but with a weight to it that she felt in her chest, "I just thought you believed in me." And Lauren, who had been told her whole professional life that she was too transactional and not emotional enough, would feel a pinch of guilt and let it go. This is what Ryan had understood from the very beginning. Lauren Mitchell was not weak, but she had the wound of being perpetually misunderstood as someone who did not feel things deeply. And Ryan had located that wound with the precision of a surgeon, and he had pressed on it gently, constantly, until helping him became her way of proving she was capable of love. It was genius in the cruelest possible sense. Within the first year, the arrangement had solidified into something Lauren had never quite consciously agreed to, but somehow found herself inside of. She transferred money into Ryan's personal account every month. She called it an operating budget for his business ventures. Ryan called it nothing at all. He simply accepted it the way someone accepts sunshine, like it was a natural and inevitable thing that arrived and made his life more comfortable. His business ventures were always approximately 3 months from taking off. There was the sports management idea, then the real estate consulting angle, then a brief period when he was in talks with a tech startup in Austin. Then something vague involving export trade that he described in terms too general to question, but specific enough to sound plausible. Lauren asked questions occasionally. Ryan always had answers. The answers were never quite satisfying, but they were always just coherent enough that challenging them felt like the act of someone who lacked faith rather than the act of someone paying attention. And Lauren, who had built her career on paying attention, had allowed herself not to. That was the thing she would have to reckon with later. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. The moment everything began to change was not dramatic. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and Lauren was reviewing quarterly expense reports with Daniel Hayes, her forensic accountant who had joined her firm 2 years earlier after a career auditing financial fraud cases for the federal government. Daniel was careful and methodical and spoke in the flat, precise sentences of someone who had learned to drain emotion from numbers because the numbers told enough of a story on their own. "Lauren," Daniel said, sliding a printed spreadsheet across the conference room table. "I need you to look at something." Lauren looked. There was a line item she did not recognize. Actually, there were several. Transfers to a company called NB Creative Solutions, LLC, totaling across 6 months nearly $240,000. "I don't know this vendor," Lauren said carefully. "No," Daniel said. "You wouldn't. It's registered to a Natalie Brooks, address in River North." Lauren said nothing for a moment. "What does NB Creative Solutions actually do?" she asked. Daniel said very quietly, "According to their website, content creation and social media marketing, but their only registered client appears to have been your firm, and none of the marketing materials or campaigns they supposedly produced appear anywhere in your company's actual output." Lauren sat back in her chair. The room was very quiet. "Who authorized these transfers?" she asked. "They were processed through the operations account," Daniel said. "Authorization codes match Ryan's company login credentials." Lauren closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Then she opened them. "Pull everything," she said. "Every transaction he touched, every authorization, every login. I want to see all of it." Daniel nodded once. He had already started. What they found over the following 2 weeks was not what Lauren had expected. She had expected to find selfishness. She had expected to find carelessness and waste. She had told herself she was ready for evidence of an affair which was painful but survivable. She had prepared herself for the ordinary disappointments of a marriage that had quietly rotted from the inside. She had not prepared herself for the document. Daniel found it inside a folder buried in the cloud backup of Ryan's personal laptop, which he had connected to the company network 4 months earlier on the pretense of needing to join a client call remotely. The file was titled with the kind of casual confidence that turned Lauren's stomach, Management Strategy L. She read it alone, late at night in her office with the door closed. It was 14 pages long. It was the most thorough and careful document Ryan Mitchell had ever produced, and it was entirely about her. Not about her in the way a partner writes about a person they love. It was more like a field guide, an operations manual, a systematic breakdown of Lauren Mitchell's emotional triggers, her professional insecurities, her deepest fears, and the specific phrases and situations most likely to make her compliant. There were sections. One section was titled Pressure Points. It listed her fear of being perceived as cold, her guilt about her father's sacrifices, her tendency to question her own judgment when challenged emotionally rather than logically. Another section was titled Maintenance. It outlined a schedule of affection and conflict, when to be warm, when to pull back slightly, to create anxiety, when to bring flowers, when to have a serious conversation about the relationship, to redirect her attention from financial questions. There was a section titled Exit Strategy, which outlined with remarkable specificity what Ryan planned to do if Lauren ever became unmanageable. It described how he planned to position himself as a wronged husband in public, how he would use their shared social connections to create a sympathetic narrative, and how he would file for a significant financial settlement based on his role as an equal partner in her life. Lauren read it 3 times. The first time she felt sick. The second time she felt cold. The third time she felt something she did not have an immediate word for, something that lived between grief and clarity, something that felt like the specific pain of finally understanding something you had suspected without ever letting yourself know it. She called Rachel Carter at 11:30 at night. Rachel answered on the second ring because Rachel Carter was the kind of attorney who answered on the second ring at 11:30 at night when her most important clients called. "I need you," Lauren said. "Not tomorrow, tonight." Rachel paused for only half a second. "I'll be there in 40 minutes. And then Lauren Mitchell, who had spent 3 years letting someone treat her kindness like a weakness, sat down at her desk and began to build the case that would end her marriage on her own terms, in her own time, in her own way. She did not want revenge. She wanted the truth to be on record. She wanted every transfer, every fake authorization, every page of that 14-page document, every email between Ryan and Natalie Brooks, every promise Ryan had made to investors, using her name and her company's reputation. Without her permission, she wanted all of it documented, verified, and ready. Because Ryan Mitchell had spent 3 years studying Lauren Mitchell, he believed he understood her completely. He believed he had her mapped. He had made one catastrophic miscalculation. He had studied the Lauren who was afraid. He had not accounted for the Lauren who wasn't anymore. Rachel arrived with a yellow legal pad and a thermos of coffee and the expression of someone who had heard a lot of terrible things in 20 years of family law and was prepared to hear one more. Lauren placed the laptop on the conference table. She opened the document. She let Rachel read. Rachel read the entire 14 pages without speaking. When she finished, she set the laptop down carefully, the way you set down something breakable. "Lauren," Rachel said. "I know," Lauren said. "This is not just a divorce case. I know. The financial fraud alone, the transfers to NB Creative Solutions, the investor misrepresentations. I know." Rachel looked at her steadily. "What do you want to do?" Lauren picked up her coffee cup. It was cold by now. She drank from it anyway. "I want to file tomorrow," she said, quietly. "I don't want him to know until it's done." Rachel nodded slowly. "If we file without notification, he'll only find out when the papers are served. Or," Lauren said, "until he makes the mistake of sending me a message that gives me an excuse to tell him myself." Rachel looked at her for a long moment. "You think he will?" Lauren almost smiled. "Ryan always overplays his hand," she said. "He's very smart, but he's never patient. He'll push too hard somewhere, and when he does, I want to already be on the other side of the door." That conversation happened on a Wednesday. On Thursday, Rachel filed the divorce papers. On Friday, Lauren signed the lease on her new apartment. On Saturday morning, Ryan Mitchell sat in a restaurant he could not afford and sent his wife the message he believed would finally give him the upper hand. And Lauren Mitchell, standing in an empty apartment with a cup of coffee and the best view she had ever owned, read his message and felt nothing but the quiet, steady recognition of a woman who had already moved on. She typed her reply, she put her phone down, and she watched the sun rise over Lake Michigan and thought about her father who had worked all his life and saved every dollar and left her something real. She thought about the promise she had made at his grave. She thought about how close she had come to wasting it. And then she thought about something else entirely. She thought about what came next, not what Ryan was about to face, not what would happen in the courtroom or the financial investigation or the social media fallout that was already beginning to build like weather on a horizon. She thought about herself, about the woman she had been before she started bending herself into shapes to accommodate someone else's comfort, about the woman she intended to be again. She was 43 years old. She was the founder and CEO of Mitchell Financial Consulting. She had a new apartment with a view of the lake, and she had, as of the previous morning, officially filed for divorce from the man who had spent 3 years treating her like a resource instead of a person. She finished her coffee. She picked up her phone. She called Marcus and confirmed her morning meeting. Then she walked to the window, pressed her hand flat against the glass, and felt the cool vibration of the city waking up beneath her palm. She was not someone's wallet. She was not someone's backup plan. She was not someone's opportunity. She was Lauren Mitchell. And she had finally, after 3 years of forgetting it, remembered exactly what that meant. Part 2. The husband who turned love into a business deal. Ryan Mitchell did not go home that night. After Lauren's reply hit his phone like a bucket of cold water at Verona restaurant, he sat for a long moment staring at the screen while Natalie watched him from across the table with the particular anxiety of someone who has built their comfort entirely on another person's foundation and has just felt it shift beneath their feet. "Call her," Natalie said. "Don't tell me what to do," Ryan said. His voice was flat, controlled, but his hand around the cocktail glass had gone white at the knuckles. He set the phone face down on the table and picked up his drink and took a long, slow sip. He was buying himself time. Natalie knew him well enough by now to recognize the gesture. Ryan always looked most composed exactly when he was most afraid. It was one of the things she had first mistaken for strength. "She's bluffing," she said again, but with less conviction this time. "Lauren doesn't bluff," Ryan said. He said it the way you acknowledge something you have always known but never wanted to say out loud. Natalie sat back in her chair. She crossed her arms. The candlelight on the table between them threw soft shadows across her face and made the silence feel heavier than it was. "So, what does that mean?" she asked. "For us?" Ryan did not answer for a long time. Because Ryan Mitchell, for all his careful planning and meticulous observation, had built everything on one assumption that had just cracked clean down the middle. He had assumed that Lauren's love for him was a leash, not a door. He had assumed that her attachment to the idea of their marriage would keep her from ever walking away completely, no matter what he did. He had studied her fears and her guilt and her need to prove she was capable of warmth, and he had concluded that those things made her manageable. He had never once seriously entertained the idea that she might simply stop. "It means," Ryan said slowly, "that I need to get ahead of this." Natalie looked at him carefully. "How?" Ryan picked up his phone again. He pulled up his attorney's contact. He stared at it for a moment, then put the phone back down. Not yet. He needed to think. He needed to understand exactly what Lauren had done and how far she had already moved before he made any calls that could be traced or timed or used against him later. This is how Ryan's mind worked. Even in crisis, it was strategic. Even when the ground was collapsing under him, he was already looking for the angle. But here's the things about strategic thinkers who have spent years operating in bad faith. When they finally meet a consequence that was built with the same level of strategic care they themselves would have applied, they do not recognize it immediately, because they cannot quite believe someone they underestimated was capable of it. Ryan Mitchell had 3 years of practice underestimating Lauren Mitchell. It was going to cost him everything. Let us go back. Not to the morning of the text message, further back than that. Back to the beginning of what Ryan actually was before Lauren ever met him, because a man like Ryan does not appear fully formed at a charity gala. He is built slowly over years from choices that start small and compound into something much larger and much darker than any single decision would suggest. Ryan had grown up in a mid-sized city in Indiana, the second of 3 children in a family that had enough to get by, but never quite enough to feel secure. His father was a salesman with a gift for charm and a weakness for big ideas that never quite materialized. His mother was practical and exhausted and had learned by the time Ryan was 10 to stop believing in promises and simply manage whatever reality arrived. Ryan had watched his father work a room with the ease of someone born to it, shaking hands and laughing at the right moments and making everyone he spoke to feel like the most interesting person in any space. He had also watched that same father come home and take off the charm like a coat at the door, leaving the family with silence and unpaid bills and vague explanations about deals that were almost there. Ryan had taken 2 very specific lessons from this. The first was that charm was not the same as character. The second was that he intended to use charm with more discipline than his father had. He was smart enough in school to get into a decent university. He studied business administration and discovered he had a genuine aptitude for understanding how organizations worked, not in the technical, accounting-heavy way that bored him, but in the human way. Who had power? Who wanted power? Who could be convinced they were getting something they wanted when they were actually giving something away? He had a few relationships in his 20s that followed a pattern he did not yet fully recognize. He gravitated toward women who were either successful or from families with resources. He was attentive and emotionally perceptive in the early stages of each relationship in ways that felt to the women involved like being deeply seen. and then gradually the dynamic would shift. Slowly enough that it was never a single moment anyone could point to, but consistently enough that each woman eventually found herself having given more than she intended and received less than she had been led to believe was coming. Two of those women had confronted him directly. One told him he was a user. One told him she felt like she had been researched instead of loved. Ryan had dismissed both assessments at the time. He had told himself they were angry and projecting. He had told himself that people who could not handle a relationship where one partner was temporarily in a position of receiving support were simply not generous enough. He was still telling himself that story when he met Lauren. But with Lauren, everything was different in one important way. The stakes were different. Lauren was not a comfortable income and a supportive family. Lauren was real wealth and real reputation, and a platform that could, if managed correctly, become the foundation for everything Ryan had been building toward his entire life. He had not planned to fall into something resembling genuine feeling for her. That had been the one variable he had not fully accounted for. Because there were moments in the first year of their relationship before the architecture of his plan had fully locked into place when Ryan looked at Lauren across a dinner table and felt something that was almost if you tilted your head and squinted at it like real admiration. She was formidable, not in a way that required announcing itself, in the quiet, load-bearing way of a person who has done hard things alone and come out the other side still standing. There was a stillness to her under pressure that Ryan found genuinely impressive, because Ryan himself had only ever learned to imitate stillness. Lauren seemed to actually possess it. He had admired it, the way you might admire a beautiful structure you have every intention of gutting for parts. By the end of their first year together, the system was fully operational, the monthly transfers into his account, the company credit cards, the car, the business expenses that floated on Lauren's goodwill like a boat that had never once touched the water under its own power. The performance that kept it all moving was emotional rather than financial. Ryan was a careful and attentive husband in precisely the ways that were hardest to argue with. He remembered small things: her coffee order, the name of her first assistant who had left the company 3 years before he arrived, the fact that she could not sleep if there was even a sliver of light under the bedroom door. He deployed these details at strategic moments with the ease of someone laying cards on a table, and Lauren, who had spent years in professional environments where emotional attentiveness was considered irrelevant, received each small act of remembering like a gift. He also knew exactly when and how to make her feel that she was failing him emotionally. Not through anger. Ryan very rarely raised his voice. Through disappointment. A certain quietness that descended after she questioned a financial decision. A slight withdrawal of warmth that she would feel without being able to name its cause. A conversation where he would eventually say gently, but with precise timing, "I just wonder sometimes if you see me as a partner or as someone you need to manage." And Lauren every time would feel the old wound open. She would wonder if she was being too transactional, too cold, too much the businesswoman and not enough the wife. She would back down. She would approve the expense or release the funds or simply let the question go. And Ryan would become warm again, as if a switch had been flipped, and for a little while everything would feel balanced and good, and Lauren would exhale and tell herself she was overthinking it. This cycle had run for 3 years. It had run long enough that Lauren had stopped questioning most of it consciously. It had simply become the architecture of her life, the way a room's layout stops registering once you have lived in it long enough. You stop noticing the door that does not open all the way. You stop thinking about the window that sticks. You simply work around them and move on. Ryan had become a feature of her life that she navigated around rather than examined. Until Daniel Hayes slid that spreadsheet across the conference table on a Tuesday afternoon, and everything started to look different in the flat, unsparing light of documentation. Here is what the records showed, stripped of the emotion and the carefully constructed story Ryan had built around each transaction. In the 3 years of their marriage, Ryan Mitchell had received a combined total of just over $400,000 in direct personal transfers from Lauren's personal accounts. These were the official monthly allowances, each one logged and time-stamped. On top of that, his use of company resources, credit cards, vehicles, office space, staff time, vendor relationships, represented an additional estimated expense of $160,000. The NB Creative Solutions transfers to Natalie Brooks's company, which bore no relationship to any actual work product delivered to Lauren's firm, totaled $240,000. That was not the worst of it. Daniel had found something else buried deeper in the records. Ryan had been presenting himself in meetings with at least 4 separate private investors as the incoming CEO of a new venture capital advisory arm of Lauren's firm, a division that did not exist and had never been discussed or authorized. He had shown these investors documents that used Lauren's firm's branding, and in 2 cases, her forged signature. He had raised using this fiction approximately $800,000 in committed capital from investors who believed they were getting access to Lauren Mitchell's expertise and network. None of that money had gone into any real investment vehicle. Daniel set the total figure on the table in front of Lauren like a verdict. More than $1.6 million. That was what 3 years of trusting Ryan Mitchell had actually cost her. Lauren did not move for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "What's our exposure if this goes public before we can control the narrative?" Daniel exhaled. "Significant. The investors he pitched may pursue claims against the firm even if you weren't personally involved." "Get me everything on each of those 4 meetings," Lauren said. "Every email, every document, every wire transfer. I want to know if there's any fingerprint anywhere in our systems." "Already on it," Daniel said. "Who else knows about this?" "Just you and me," Daniel said. "I haven't said anything to anyone on the team. I wanted you to see it first." Lauren nodded. She was quiet for a moment. Daniel watched her and said nothing, because in 2 years of working for her, he had learned that Lauren's silence was usually the sound of her thinking very fast about several things at once, and the best thing you could do during those silences was simply wait. "Thank you, Daniel," she finally said, "for being careful, for being thorough." "That's the job," he said. "No," Lauren said. "This is beyond the job. I know that, and I won't forget it." She called Rachel that same evening, and the following morning Rachel filed the divorce papers. Clean, quiet, legally airtight. Ryan knew nothing. He was in that same period staying most nights in a hotel in River North that Lauren was technically still paying for through a company account he had continued to access. He had told Lauren weeks before that he needed space to think about a big business decision and needed to be downtown to be available for meetings. Lauren had said nothing. She had noted the hotel charge and filed it in the folder Daniel was building. Ryan spent those days in an atmosphere of comfortable confidence. He had lunch meetings he described to Natalie as progress on a major realignment of his positioning. He made phone calls in hushed tones in hotel corridors that were actually just calls to old contacts he hoped might offer him credibility if things with Lauren became complicated. He spent evenings at places like Verona, telling stories about deals in progress and future ventures to anyone who would listen, projecting the aura of a man who was not in the least bit worried. He was performing confidence the way he had performed everything else his whole life. And in the middle of that performance, feeling untouchable and certain he had decided to send Lauren the text. It had been an impulse born of too much confidence and too many cocktails and the particular arrogance of a man who has gotten away with things for so long that he has confused luck with skill. "No allowance this month. I'm done being controlled. I want a divorce." He had meant it as leverage. He had done the calculation in his head. Lauren's fear of failure, her need to believe the marriage was real, her guilt about not being emotional enough, and he had concluded that the threat of losing him would be more than she could absorb without capitulating. He had pressed the exact wrong pressure point at the exact wrong moment, because the Lauren who would have crumbled under that pressure no longer existed. The Lauren who read that message had been awake since 4 a.m. in an apartment he did not know about drinking coffee she had bought herself watching a sunrise that belonged entirely to her. Ryan found out the divorce papers were real when his attorney called him at 9:15 that morning. He was still at the restaurant when the call came. Natalie had gone quiet after their earlier exchange and was picking at the remains of her meal with the focused inattention of someone actively pretending not to be anxious. Ryan stepped outside to take the call. His attorney's name was Glenn Farber. Glenn was expensive and precise and not easily surprised, but his voice when Ryan answered carried a particular careful quality that Ryan recognized immediately as a lawyer managing bad news. "Ryan," Glenn said, "I've received notification from Rachel Carter's office. Lauren filed yesterday. The papers are already entered. This is a formal proceeding." Ryan stood on the sidewalk outside Verona and felt the cold night air touch the back of his neck. "She filed yesterday," he repeated. "Yesterday morning," Glenn confirmed, "which means your text message this morning was sent after the filing was already complete." There was a pause. Ryan understood exactly what that pause meant. He had sent his leverage text to a woman who was already legally in the process of divorcing him. His threat to leave had arrived after she had already moved. His carefully aimed psychological weapon had landed on an empty target. "What's her position?" Ryan asked. Glenn exhaled. "Aggressive. Rachel has submitted a significant volume of financial documentation. I haven't had time to review all of it yet, but from what I've seen in the initial filing, Lauren's team has been building this for some time." "How long?" "At minimum several weeks based on the volume of material, possibly longer." Ryan went very still. Several weeks, which meant Lauren had been sitting across from him at dinner, answering his texts, responding to his calls, existing in the shared space of their marriage, while simultaneously constructing the legal architecture of his destruction, for weeks. Without showing him anything, without changing her expression or her tone or her behavior in any way he had detected. He had studied her for 3 years, and she had been hiding this from him for weeks without giving him a single tell. "I need to see you tonight," Ryan said. "I'll make myself available," Glenn said carefully. "But Ryan, I need to prepare you. Whatever documentation they have submitted is extensive. The strategy Rachel is using suggests they are not looking for a settlement. They are looking for a complete financial separation with possible referral for fraud investigation." That last word landed like a fist. Fraud. Ryan's voice when it came was very quiet. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Glenn said, choosing each word with the deliberateness of someone navigating a minefield, "that this may not remain a civil matter for very long." The night air was cold, but Ryan barely felt it. He stood on the sidewalk outside an expensive restaurant he had never been able to afford and looked at his own reflection in the glass of the window beside him, the suit Lauren had bought, the watch Lauren had given him for their first anniversary, the phone Lauren paid for, and for the first time in 3 years, Ryan Mitchell felt something he had very carefully trained himself not to feel. He felt afraid. He went back inside. He sat down. He looked at Natalie, who looked back at him with the expression of someone who already knows the answer to a question they are afraid to ask. "Tell me what's happening," she said. Ryan picked up his glass. It was empty. He set it down. "I made a mistake," he said. It was in 3 years of marriage possibly the most honest thing Ryan Mitchell had ever said. Natalie stared at him. "What kind of mistake?" Ryan looked at her for a long moment. He looked at her the way you look at something you have been using for so long that you have never quite had to think about what it actually is. "I thought I understood her," Ryan said. "And you don't." He shook his head slowly. "I understood who she used to be," he said. "I didn't notice when she changed." Natalie's face did something complicated. She had been in her own way another version of the story Ryan always told someone whose instability and ambition he had located and attached himself to funding just enough of her lifestyle to keep her loyal and useful, while using her to manage the parts of his life he could not run through Lauren's accounts directly. But Natalie was sharper than Ryan sometimes remembered. "Ryan," she said, "those transfers you sent through my company." "Don't," Ryan said. "If she has the records." "Natalie." His voice was sharp now. "Stop." She stopped. They sat in silence in a restaurant full of other people's laughter and the soft ambient noise of an expensive Tuesday night. Two people who had built a comfort together on a foundation that was, it was now clear, dissolving under them in real time. Natalie picked up her bag. "I think I need to talk to a lawyer," she said. Ryan said nothing. She stood up. "Ryan." She waited for him to look at her. When he did, her expression was not angry. It was something more complicated than anger. I didn't know how far it went, she said. With the investors, with her firm, I want you to know that. Ryan said nothing. She left. He sat alone at the table with the remnants of a dinner he had charged to a card that had belonged, as of yesterday morning, to a woman who had already moved on, and he tried to think his way through the situation, the way he always had, searching for the angle, the narrative, the pressure point that would give him back the upper hand. And for the first time in his adult life, he could not find one. Because Lauren had not made an emotional decision. She had made a strategic one, and she had made it with far more patience, precision, and thoroughness than Ryan had ever allowed himself to believe she was capable of. He had studied her for 3 years. He had read her fears. He had mapped her wounds. He had written 14 pages of notes about how to keep her compliant, and still, somehow, she had been the one doing the harder, quieter, more dangerous work all along. Ryan Mitchell sat alone at a table in Verona restaurant and came face to face with the thing he had spent his entire life running from. He was not the smartest person in the room. He had just been the loudest. And Lauren Mitchell had simply waited until the room was quiet enough to let the truth speak for itself. Meanwhile, 4 miles east, in an apartment with a view of Lake Michigan, and a folding chair and a coffee maker, and not a single thing in it that belonged to anyone but herself, Lauren Mitchell had her second cup of coffee, opened her laptop, and answered 37 emails before 7 in the morning. She had a full day ahead of her. She did not think about Ryan. She thought about her clients, about the quarterly reports due at the end of the week, about a new hire she was considering in the analytics division, about the fact that she needed to buy a proper kitchen table for the new apartment because eating off a folding chair was fine for now, but was not going to work indefinitely. She thought about calling her friend Sandra, who had been quietly and carefully worried about Lauren for 2 years and would be both unsurprised and deeply relieved to hear that the divorce was finally filed. She thought about her father. She thought about the morning light on the water. She was not celebrating. She was not in the exhilarated electric state of someone who has finally struck back at someone who hurt them. She was in the quieter, deeper state of someone who has put something down that they were not meant to carry and whose shoulders are just now beginning to remember what it felt like before the weight arrived. This was not the end of something, or rather it was the end, but the end was not the story. The end was just the door closing behind her as she walked out of a room she should have left much sooner. What came next was the rest of her life, and Lauren Mitchell was already in motion. Part 3. The day the Mooch husband lost everything, Ryan Mitchell had not slept. He had gone back to his hotel room after leaving. Verona sat on the edge of the bed with his jacket still on and spent the next 4 hours staring at the wall with the particular stillness of a man whose mind is running too fast for his body to follow. He had gone through every scenario he could construct, every angle, every possible move. He had picked up his phone 3 times to call Lauren and put it back down each time, because calling her without a strategy was worse than not calling at all, and for the first time in years, he could not find the strategy. Glenn Farber arrived at the hotel at 7 the next morning with a leather briefcase and the expression of a man about to deliver a second round of bad news to someone who had not yet fully processed the first round. Ryan opened the door before Glenn could knock twice. "Tell me everything," Ryan said. Glenn sat down at the small desk near the window and opened his briefcase with the deliberate calm of someone who has learned that projecting composure in front of a panicking client is half the job. "I reviewed Rachel Carter's initial filing last night," Glenn said. "All of it. It took me most of the night." And Glenn set a printed document on the desk in front of Ryan. It was thick, more than 100 pages. "It's thorough," Glenn said. "Lauren's team has been documenting for at minimum 2 months, possibly longer. The financial records they've submitted are complete and forensically prepared. That means they've had an expert, not just an accountant, a forensic specialist verifying each transaction." Ryan stared at the document without touching it. "What specific transactions are included?" "All of them," Glenn said quietly. "The personal transfers, the company card usage, the vehicle arrangements, the vendor payments to NB Creative Solutions." He paused. "And the investor meetings." Ryan felt something drop in his stomach. How much do they know about the investor meetings? "Enough," Glenn said. They have email records, meeting invitations, document drafts, and wire transfer confirmations for all 4 investors. They also have, and I want you to hear this clearly, copies of 2 documents that appear to carry Lauren's signature authorizing the Venture Advisory Division. Ryan said nothing. Ryan, Glenn's voice was precise. Tell me right now whether those signatures are real. Ryan was quiet for 3 seconds too long. Glenn leaned back in his chair. All right, he said. He said it the way a doctor says all right when a patient has just confirmed something they had already diagnosed. Then you need to understand that this is no longer simply a divorce proceeding. Rachel Carter has already been in contact with the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. Depending on how the investor situation develops, this could involve federal wire fraud statutes. The word federal sat in the hotel room like something physical. Ryan stood up. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to Glenn for a moment, hands in his pockets, looking at the city that had been the stage for everything he had built and everything he had taken from someone who trusted him. What are my options? He asked. Honestly, Glenn said, you cooperate fully and immediately. You return every documentable asset that can be connected to Lauren's accounts. You make no public statements, and you retain a criminal defense attorney in addition to me because this is moving beyond my area of specialization. Ryan turned around slowly. A criminal attorney, he said. Yes, Glenn said. You're telling me she's coming for me criminally. Glenn chose his words carefully. I'm telling you that the documentation she has submitted would support a referral for criminal investigation. Whether Lauren personally pursues that, or whether regulatory agencies pick it up independently once the filing becomes part of the public record, that is something neither of us can control at this point. Ryan sat back down on the edge of the bed. He looked at his hands. The watch on his left wrist caught the morning light. It was a Patek Philippe. Lauren had given it to him for his birthday the previous year. She had had it engraved on the back with his initials and the date. He remembered the night she gave it to him. She had been understated about it, the way she was understated about everything generous she did. She had simply handed him the box across the dinner table and said, I saw it and thought you'd like it. He had thanked her and told her it was exactly what he had wanted. What he had actually been thinking was that it was worth $42,000, and he had looked up how to authenticate and resell vintage Pateks the following morning. He had not sold it. He had kept wearing it. It looked better on his wrist as a visible symbol of his life than it would have as cash in an account. Everything Ryan had was better used as a visible symbol than as something real. He looked at the watch and felt something shift inside him. Not remorse exactly. Ryan Mitchell was not a man who moved easily into remorse, but something adjacent to it, something that arrived when the performance finally stopped being sustainable and the performer was left alone in a room with the props. I need to think, Ryan said. You have until Monday before Rachel files the supplemental documentation with the IDFPR, Glenn said. After that, my advice is less useful. Glenn left. Ryan stayed sitting on the edge of the bed for a long time. Then he did something he had not done in several years. He called his mother. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was careful, the way it always was when Ryan called unexpectedly, because unexpected calls from Ryan historically meant he needed something. Ryan, she said, is everything all right? No, he said. A pause. What happened? Lauren filed for divorce, he said. His mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said carefully, I see. You don't sound surprised, Ryan said. Ryan, his mother said. And in the way she said his name, he heard something he recognized from childhood. Not anger, not disappointment exactly, something more like the sound of a person who has been waiting a long time for a conversation they knew was coming. I'm not going to lie to you and say I'm surprised. I've been worried about you for years, about who you've been, about what you've been doing. You don't know what I've been doing, Ryan said. I know more than you think, she said. Your aunt ran into one of Lauren's colleagues at a conference 8 months ago. Things get back. They always do. Ryan pressed his free hand flat against his thigh and said nothing. I love you, his mother said, but I have been watching you do this your whole life. Take from people, use what they offer, and then look for the next person. I thought Lauren might be different. I thought maybe you'd changed. Mom, "I'm not angry at you," she said. "I'm sad for you because you had something real there and you treated it like a resource. And now it's gone, and you're going to spend a long time figuring out what that cost you." She paused. "Not just the money, the person, what it cost you to be the kind of man who would do this to her." Ryan had no answer for that. He sat on the edge of a hotel bed wearing a watch Lauren had given him and stared at the carpet and listened to his mother breathe on the other end of the line. "Call me when you're ready to talk honestly," she said. "I'll always answer." She hung up. Ryan set the phone face up on the bed beside him and sat in the quiet for a long time. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and did the only thing he knew how to do when the internal architecture fell apart. He went back to performing. He called 3 of his social contacts, people who knew both him and Lauren from the charity circuit and the professional community they had moved through together. He told each of them in a voice that was controlled and aggrieved, in careful proportion, that Lauren had blindsided him with divorce papers without warning, and that he was devastated and confused, and that he feared she was acting on bad advice from people around her who had never fully accepted him. By noon on Wednesday, a version of this story had moved through 3 separate social circles. By Thursday morning, a post appeared on Ryan's social media, carefully written to project wounded dignity rather than anger, describing the pain of being abandoned by someone you built a life beside, and hinting at a situation where success and money replaced communication and love. He did not name Lauren directly. He did not need to. Everyone who mattered knew exactly who he was talking about. And that, as it turned out, was his second catastrophic mistake in 72 hours. Lauren was in a meeting with her management team Thursday morning when Marcus placed a printed screenshot on the table in front of her without interrupting the discussion. She glanced at it. She read Ryan's post in 10 seconds. She set the paper face down on the table, finished the point she was making about the Q3 projections, and then said when the agenda item was closed, "Give me 10 minutes." She walked to her office. She closed the door. She called Rachel. "He posted," Lauren said. "I saw it," Rachel said, 20 minutes ago. "Does it create a problem for us?" "It creates a problem for him," Rachel said. Public statements during active divorce proceedings, particularly ones that can be read as characterizations of the opposing party, are the kind of thing judges notice. More importantly, 3 of the 4 investors he pitched have now been contacted by our office as part of the discovery process. One of them called our office this morning after seeing the post. Lauren's grip on the phone tightened slightly. "What did they say?" "They said they want to cooperate fully with any investigation," Rachel said. "They said that when they entered into investment conversations with Ryan, they believed they were dealing with a representative of your firm. They said the representation was explicit. They have emails." Lauren closed her eyes for a moment. "How much exposure does the firm have?" she asked. "Minimal," Rachel said. "Possibly none. The investors were sophisticated parties, and the documentation Ryan produced was clearly external to the firm's official channels. Daniel's audit trail, showing that you had no knowledge or authorization of these meetings, is extensive and clean." "All right," Lauren said. "What do we do about the post?" "Nothing," Rachel said immediately. "Do not respond. Do not acknowledge it. Do not have anyone in your circle respond to it. Silence is a legal strategy right now, and it is also, frankly, the most powerful thing you can do in public." Lauren almost smiled. "Let him talk." "Let him talk," Rachel confirmed. "Every word he says publicly becomes part of the record, and right now the record is not his friend." Lauren thanked her and ended the call. She sat in her office for a moment. She pulled up Ryan's post on her phone. She read it again, more carefully this time. She noticed the language he had used. Built a life beside. Communication replaced by money. Abandoned. He had taken the 14 pages of notes he had written about her vulnerabilities and turned them into a public narrative. He had correctly identified that Lauren's professional reputation was built partly on a perception of coldness, and he was now trying to use that perception against her in the court of public opinion. It was, she had to acknowledge, not entirely stupid. It was also 3 months too late. Because while Ryan had been performing confidence in River North restaurants and calling mutual friends and composing wounded social media posts, Lauren's team had been doing something much quieter and much more permanent. They had been making sure the documented truth was in the hands of everyone who needed to have it. The 4 investors, the regulatory office, the financial industry oversight body that had jurisdiction over the kind of misrepresentation Ryan had engaged in, and Daniel Hayes had quietly at Lauren's instruction prepared a comprehensive summary document that laid out the full picture of Ryan's 3-year financial arrangement with Lauren's Life and Company, not for publication, not for social media, but for the specific people and institutions that had the authority to do something about it. Lauren did not want Ryan destroyed publicly. She wanted him corrected officially. There is a difference. One is emotional, one is structural. Lauren Mitchell dealt in structures. By Friday afternoon, the social media post Ryan had published on Thursday morning had taken on a life he had not anticipated and could not control. It had started with a comment from someone who identified themselves as a former mutual acquaintance of Ryan and Lauren's, someone who had been present at a charity dinner the previous year, and had witnessed Ryan tell a table of people about his 50% stake in Lauren's firm during a conversation about investment opportunities. That comment attracted 4 replies, then 12. Then the thread began to move in a direction Ryan had not scripted. Someone else shared a screenshot of a social post from 8 months earlier in which Ryan had explicitly described himself as the co-founder of a financial consulting venture in Chicago alongside a respected industry professional he did not name. People started connecting the dots, not loudly, not with accusations, just with the quiet accumulating weight of a collective memory being activated by a single triggering post. Ryan saw what was happening and deleted the original post by Friday evening. But deletion on the internet is never really deletion. By Saturday morning, Ryan's attorney, Glenn Farber, called him again. The investors, Glenn said, all 4 of them have now retained their own counsel. Ryan sat very still. All 4, he repeated. All 4, Glenn confirmed. And Ryan, I need to tell you that I received a call this morning from an attorney I know at the federal level. Nothing formal. But he wanted me to know that certain documentation connected to your investment activities has attracted the attention of people with authority I do not have. Ryan's voice, when it came, was barely above a murmur. Federal. Ryan, Glenn said, I need you to come into my office today, not Monday, today. We need to have a very different kind of conversation than the ones we've been having. Ryan ended the call. He sat in the hotel room that Lauren was technically still paying for through the company account, in a suit Lauren had bought him, with a watch Lauren had given him, staring at a phone Lauren was paying for, and understood with a clarity that came very late but arrived with devastating completeness that he had not played a long game. He had played a short game and disguised it as a long one, and the difference between those 2 things had just become impossible to hide. He posted nothing else. He called no one from their social circle. He went to Glenn's office. And then, in the middle of everything that was falling apart around him, something happened that nobody, not Lauren, not Rachel, not Daniel, and certainly not Ryan, had seen coming. Natalie Brooks walked into Rachel Carter's office on Saturday afternoon and asked to speak with someone. She arrived alone, without an attorney, without a prepared statement. She sat down across from one of Rachel's associates, a careful young woman named Priya Mehta, who had been working on Lauren's case since the beginning, and she placed a manila folder on the desk between them. I want to cooperate, Natalie said. I want to tell you what I know, all of it. Priya looked at the folder. Ms. Brooks, I'd strongly recommend you have your own attorney present before— I have an attorney, Natalie said. He knows I'm here. He said I could come. She pushed the folder forward. I kept everything, every email, every message, every transfer notification. I kept it because I wasn't sure what was going to happen, and I didn't want to be the one holding nothing if it all fell apart. Priya opened the folder. Inside were printed emails between Natalie and Ryan spanning 18 months. bank records showing the transfers from NB Creative Solutions into Natalie's personal accounts, and 3 documents that Priya had not seen before, documents Ryan had sent to Natalie in the early stages of their arrangement, detailed plans for what Ryan intended to do with Lauren's money and reputation, and how long he expected to need Natalie's company as a vehicle for the transfers before he could exit the arrangement entirely. Priya read the first document. Then she looked up at Natalie. "How long did you know what he was doing?" Priya asked. Natalie's expression was complicated. Not innocent, not calculating, something in between. "I knew he was using her money to fund my company," she said. "I told myself it was a business arrangement between him and her. I told myself it wasn't my business where the money came from." "But you suspected." Natalie looked at this table. "I suspected more than I admitted to myself, yes." "When did you find out about the investors?" Priya asked. 6 weeks ago, Natalie said. "He mentioned it casually, like it was something I should know about but didn't need to worry about. When I realized what he'd actually done, the forged signatures, the fake division, I told him I needed distance. That's when things between us started to fall apart. And the post he made on social media this week." Natalie's jaw tightened slightly. "That's when I called my attorney." Priya closed the folder carefully. She looked at Natalie for a long moment. "Is there anything else you haven't shown me?" she asked. Natalie reached into her bag and placed a small external hard drive on the desk. "Everything," she said. 18 months of everything. I backed it up 3 times. When Rachel called Lauren that Saturday evening, Lauren was in her new apartment, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall because the furniture had not arrived yet, eating takeout Thai food and listening to Ella Fitzgerald on a small portable speaker she had bought years ago and somehow kept through the years of her marriage, even though Ryan had called it embarrassingly small and suggested several times that they upgrade to something more impressive. She had always kept the small speaker. She picked up on the first ring. "Natalie Brooks came in today," Rachel said without preamble. Lauren was quiet for a moment. "She came to you," Lauren said. "She came to Priya with documents." Rachel paused. "Lauren, the material she brought in fills in every gap in the record that we were still working to close. Emails between her and Ryan that document his intentions from the beginning. Financial records. And 3 planning documents Ryan sent to her that describe in his own words and his own handwriting in the margins exactly what he planned to do with your money and how long he planned to do it." Lauren set down her food. "His own words," she said. "His own words," Rachel confirmed. "Lauren, this is no longer a case where anyone is going to be able to argue that this was a misunderstanding or a marital disagreement about finances. This is documented intentional fraud spanning 3 years. The investor misrepresentation, the forged signatures, the systematic transfers through NB Creative Solutions. It is all there, in writing, from Ryan's own communications." Lauren leaned her head back against the wall. In the background, Ella Fitzgerald was singing something slow and warm, and certain the kind of voice that fills a room without needing to push. "How does Ryan not know she came in?" Lauren asked. "He may know by now," Rachel said, "or he may find out Monday when the supplemental filing lands and he sees her name on the documentation list." Lauren thought about Ryan sitting wherever he was sitting right now in the hotel room. She was technically still paying for wearing the watch she had given him, thinking he was still managing the situation. She thought about the 14 pages. She thought about the section titled Maintenance. She thought about the section titled Exit Strategy. She thought about the fact that she had read those 14 pages 6 times over the past 2 months and never once cried. She had felt sick, and she had felt cold, and she had felt that specific terrible grief of understanding clearly something you had half known for a long time without letting yourself know it fully. But she had not cried. She was not sure what that meant about her. She was not sure it meant anything. "Rachel," Lauren said, "what happens Monday?" "Monday," Rachel said, "is the beginning of the end for Ryan. The supplemental filing goes in. The IDFPR documentation goes forward. The investors' attorneys will have received everything they need by end of business Monday. And Glenn Farber, who is a careful man and an ethical one, will sit down with Ryan Monday morning and tell him that the only remaining question is how badly this ends for him." "And for the firm?" Lauren asked. "The firm is clean," Rachel said. "Daniel's work over the past 2 months has made that case completely. You are a victim of fraud committed against your company, not a party to it. The regulatory position is clear." Lauren exhaled slowly. "Okay," she said. "Lauren," Rachel's voice shifted slightly, softer, more personal than her usual professional register. "You should know that what you did, the way you handled this, the patience and the precision. I've been in family law for 20 years. I have never seen anyone navigate something this painful with this much clarity. You didn't let your anger lead. You let the evidence lead." Lauren was quiet for a moment. "I was angry," she said. "I just couldn't afford to lead with it." "I know," Rachel said. "That's what I mean." After they hung up, Lauren sat on the floor of her empty apartment and listened to Ella sing and ate her Thai food and thought about Monday. She did not think about Ryan with satisfaction exactly. What she felt was more like the specific exhaustion that follows a very long effort. The kind of tired that is not unpleasant because it comes from having finally, after everything done, the thing that needed doing. She thought about her father. She thought about this promise at his grave. She thought about the money he had saved working a factory floor for 30 years, every dollar set aside with the particular determination of a man who wanted to give his daughter something real. She had almost lost it all, not just the money, the thing the money represented, the possibility of a life she had built herself that belonged to her, that no one had given her and no one could take. She had almost let that go. She had not. She finished her food. She turned up the speaker a little. Ella's voice filled the empty apartment the way voices do when there are no walls decorated yet, no furniture to absorb the sound, just bare walls and wood floors, and the pure, unmediated resonance of music in a space that is finally entirely yours. Lauren closed her eyes. Monday was coming, and she was ready. Part 4. Justice without revenge. Monday arrived the way significant days often do. Without ceremony, without warning in the weather or the light, just an ordinary morning that happened to be carrying the weight of everything that had been building for months. Lauren was up at 4:30. She did not need an alarm. Her body had learned over the past several weeks to release her from sleep early on the days when something important was scheduled, as if her nervous system understood that certain mornings required more time than others. She made coffee. She stood at the window of her apartment, which now had a couch and a proper kitchen table and 3 boxes of books she had not yet unpacked, and she watched the city come awake beneath her, with the particular patience of someone who has already done all the preparation they can do and is now simply waiting for the process to run its course. Rachel had told her to be at the courthouse by 9. The supplemental filing would be submitted at 8 the moment the clerk's office opened. The IDFPR notification would go out simultaneously. The investors' attorneys had been coordinating with Rachel's office through the weekend and were prepared to file their own documentation as supporting material. Ryan would be notified by Glenn Farber at 8:30. Lauren had arranged all of this with the same methodical precision she brought to a quarterly earnings report or a complex portfolio restructure. She had given each piece its place and its timing. She had made sure nothing overlapped in a way that could create confusion or give anyone room to argue they had not received proper notice. She had been, as Rachel told her on Sunday evening during their final preparation call, almost unsettlingly calm about the whole thing. Lauren had smiled at that. "I've been calm for weeks," she said. "The hard part was the weeks before anyone knew. Now we're just following the process." "Still," Rachel said, "most clients in your position are not sleeping well the night before a major filing." "I sleep fine," Lauren said, and she did. The insomnia that had plagued her during the last year of her marriage, those late nights lying awake running numbers in her head that never quite added up, those had disappeared almost entirely since the night she called Rachel and said, "I need you not tomorrow, tonight." As if her body had been waiting for permission to rest, and the decision to act had finally given it. She poured her second cup of coffee at 5:15 and called Sandra. Sandra Reyes had been Lauren's closest friend for 11 years. They had met at a professional women's conference in their early 30s, had bonded instantly over a shared impatience with panel discussions that talked about breaking glass ceilings without mentioning the specific cost of broken glass, and had built a friendship that survived career pivots. One of Sandra's divorces, Lauren's father's death, and the full arc of Lauren's marriage to Ryan, a marriage that Sandra had been skeptical about from the beginning and too loyal to say so clearly until Lauren was ready to hear it. Sandra answered on the first ring. "It's today," Lauren said. "I know it's today," Sandra said. Her voice was warm and alert, in the way of someone who had also not slept particularly deeply. "How are you, Ready," Lauren said. "You have been ready for 2 months," Sandra said. "Today you're just finishing what you started." "That's a good way to put it." "I know it is. I'm very good with words." Sandra paused. "Lauren, are you actually okay? And I mean that in the real way, not the professional way." Lauren thought about the question honestly. "I think I'm better than okay," she said, "which is strange because I keep expecting to feel worse about this than I do. Like I'm waiting for some moment of grief that hasn't fully arrived yet. Maybe it already came," Sandra said quietly. "Maybe you grieved while you were still inside it. Maybe all those nights you couldn't sleep in that house that was the grief. Maybe you used it up already, and what you're left with is just the other side." Lauren pressed her palm flat against the window glass. The city was beginning to lighten. "Maybe," she said. "Go get dressed," Sandra said, "and call me the second you're out of that courthouse. I will be sitting in my office staring at my phone." Lauren laughed, the first genuine, unguarded laugh she could remember in a long time. "I love you," she said. "I love you back," Sandra said. "Now go." Glenn Farber called Ryan at 8:27 that Monday morning. Ryan was already awake. He had been awake since 6, sitting at the small desk in his hotel room with a legal pad in front of him, covered in handwritten notes that were less a strategy than a performance of having a strategy. He had been writing and crossing things out and writing again since before dawn, and by the time Glenn called, the legal pad was mostly crossed out. He answered immediately. "Glenn." "Ryan." Glenn's voice was different from any version of it Ryan had heard before. Not careful, not professionally managed, just direct in the way of someone who has moved past the stage where softening is useful. "The supplemental filing went in at 8 o'clock this morning. I've now had time to review the complete package, including the material from Natalie Brooks that was incorporated into the filing." Ryan was very still. "How much did she give them?" he asked. "Everything," Glenn said. "Ryan, she gave them 18 months of documented correspondence, financial records, and 3 planning documents that appear to be authored by you. Documents that describe in considerable detail your intentions regarding Lauren's finances and your use of NB Creative Solutions as a transfer vehicle." Ryan pressed his free hand flat against the legal pad in front of him. The room was very quiet. "She kept everything," Ryan said. It was not quite a question. It was more like the sound of a man realizing that the one variable he had not accounted for had just decided the outcome of everything. "She kept everything," Glenn confirmed. "And she delivered it voluntarily with counsel present, which means there is no argument of coercion or unreliable sourcing. This is now part of the official record." Ryan said nothing. "Ryan," Glenn said, "I also need to tell you that as of 8:15 this morning, I received notification that the IDFPR has opened a formal inquiry into the investor meeting activities. This is no longer a civil matter that we are managing alongside a divorce proceeding. These are 2 separate tracks now, and the second track is moving very quickly." "What does quickly mean?" Ryan asked. "It means you need to speak to a criminal defense attorney today. Not this week, today." Glenn paused. "I have a colleague I can refer you to. She is excellent and she is available. But Ryan, I need you to understand the position we are in. The documentation Rachel's team has submitted is comprehensive and forensically sound. The voluntary cooperation of Natalie Brooks closes the gaps that might otherwise have given us room to contest the framing of events. The investor documentation is coming in through a separate legal channel that neither of us can delay or redirect." Ryan heard all of this. He processed all of this. And then he said the thing that had been sitting in the back of his mind since Saturday night, when he had sat alone in the restaurant and felt the first real edge of what was coming. "Is there any version of this," he said slowly, "where I cooperate fully right now, voluntarily, before it goes any further, and that changes the outcome for me?" Glenn was quiet for a moment. Full cooperation, voluntary disclosure, and complete financial restitution, Glenn said, are the three factors most likely to influence a prosecutor's decision on the severity of charges if it reaches that stage. I cannot promise you an outcome, but those three things are your best available position. All right, Ryan said. He said it the same way his mother had said it on the phone the previous week when he had told her about the divorce, and she had said all right in the voice of someone who had already known. Call your client list, Glenn said. Not to manage them, to tell them the truth. And Ryan, get out of that hotel today. It's being paid for by Lauren's company account. Being served papers at an address connected to her firm is the last place you want to be when the next phase of this begins. Ryan looked around the hotel room. At the minibar, he had charged to the room. At the room service tray from the previous evening still sitting near the door. At the suit jacket hanging on the back of the desk chair, bought on a company card pressed by the hotel valet service charged to the room. All of it, every comfortable thing surrounding him in that moment was someone else's. He had been living inside someone else's life for 3 years and had mistaken it for his own. I'll check out today, he said. He did. By 9:30 Monday morning, Ryan Mitchell had settled his hotel bill on a personal card that had not been used in several months and carried a balance he had been ignoring. Had packed his bags into a taxi and had made arrangements to stay with a college friend in Evanston who owed him a favor from years ago and was not yet aware of the full scope of what was happening. He did not make any public statements. He did not post anything. He called his mother back because she had said to call her when he was ready to talk honestly, and he was finally ready. She answered before the second ring. I'm ready to talk, he said. I know, she said. I've been waiting. She did not say I told you so. She did not list his failures back to him. She simply listened with the particular quality of attention that mothers who love difficult children develop over years of practice, as Ryan told her for the first time, and without performance or strategy, the truth about what he had done. It took a long time. When he was finished, she was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do now? She asked. I don't know yet, he said, but I'm going to stop pretending I'm someone I'm not. That, his mother said, is the first honest thing you've said to me in years. He did not argue with that. At the courthouse, Lauren sat in a chair outside the main hearing room, with Rachel beside her going through the final sequence of the morning's filings on a tablet. The supplemental documentation had been entered cleanly. The IDFPR notification had been acknowledged. The investors' attorneys had filed their supporting materials. Everything that had been built carefully and patiently over the past 2 months was now in the hands of the institutions and the people with the authority to move it forward. Lauren's role at this point was largely to be present and composed. She was very good at both. Rachel looked up from the tablet. How are you holding up? Fine, Lauren said. Then because Rachel deserved honesty more than performance, she amended it. Quieter than I expected. I thought this morning would feel bigger than it does. That's usually what happens when you've done the work ahead of time, Rachel said. The moment itself is anticlimactic. It's the preparation that costs everything. The preparation cost everything, Lauren agreed quietly. The hearing that followed was not dramatic in the Hollywood sense. There were no outbursts, no revelations delivered in shocked courtrooms, no moments that could be scored with music. What there was thorough and methodical and devastating in the specific quiet way that documented truth is devastating when it is presented clearly and without embellishment to someone with the authority to act on it. Ryan was not present. He had sent Glenn with a formal notification that he was prepared to engage in settlement discussions regarding the financial aspects of the divorce. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Weston, was 61 years old, had been on the family court bench for 14 years, and had the particular expression of someone who has heard every version of every story and learned to read documentation with the same attention other people give to testimony. She reviewed Rachel's submitted materials with careful, unhurried attention. She asked 3 questions. All 3 were directed at Rachel. All 3 were about the forensic methodology behind Daniel's financial analysis. Rachel answered each one with the precision of someone who had prepared for exactly these questions. Judge Weston made a note on her legal pad. Then she looked up. The court finds the financial documentation submitted by petitioner's counsel to be comprehensive and forensically sound, she said. The petition for dissolution of marriage is granted. With respect to the financial settlement requested, the court finds no basis for respondent's claim of equitable contribution to the marital estate. The monthly transfers, company asset usage, and vendor payments documented in the record represent a pattern of financial dependency maintained at petitioner's expense, not a pattern of mutual contribution. She paused. The court further notes that the documentation submitted suggests potential grounds for civil fraud claims beyond the scope of this proceeding, and that the petitioner reserves the right to pursue such claims independently. She looked at Rachel. Has your client received independent legal counsel regarding the investor misrepresentation matter? She has, Your Honor, Rachel said. Good. Judge Weston made another note. The court's order is entered as of this date. No financial support will be awarded to respondent. Respondent's access to petitioner's personal and business accounts is terminated as of the date of filing, which I note precedes this hearing. Any continued access subsequent to that date should be documented and may constitute a separate cause of action. She closed the file in front of her. We're adjourned. That was it. 22 minutes. The 3 years, the $400,000 in personal transfers, the $240,000 through NB Creative Solutions, the forged signatures, the $800,000 in fraudulent investor commitments, the 14 pages of notes about how to manage a woman's emotional vulnerabilities for financial gain, all of it had been received, reviewed, and acted upon in 22 minutes. Lauren did not feel triumphant. She felt something much simpler and much more solid than triumph. She felt the ground under her feet. Rachel squeezed her arm as they stood. It's done, Rachel said quietly. It's done, Lauren repeated. They walked out into the corridor together, and Rachel was already moving to her phone to coordinate the next steps with the IDFPR contact and the investor's attorneys. And Lauren stood for a moment in the hallway of the courthouse and breathed, just breathed, in and out. The way you breathe when you have been holding something very tightly for a very long time and have finally carefully set it down. Her phone buzzed. Sandra texting from her office. Well? Lauren typed back. Done. Clean. He gets nothing. 3 seconds passed. Sandra sent back a single line. Your dad would be so proud of you. Lauren read it once. She put her phone in her pocket. She did not cry in the corridor of the courthouse, but it was the closest she had come in the entire 2 months since she found the spreadsheet and called Daniel, and the whole careful machinery of truth-telling had been set in motion. It was Sandra's words that almost broke through, not the judge's ruling or the numbers or the legal language. It was the image of her father, the factory worker who saved every dollar, who had left her something real and trusted her to do something real with it. She had not wasted it. She walked to the elevator. Rachel caught up with her. The next 60 days will involve the IDFPR process and potentially a referral to federal prosecutors if the investor situation warrants it. I'll keep you updated on every development. Your role at this point is minimal. Daniel's documentation does the heavy lifting. What about Ryan? Lauren asked. What does the next 60 days look like for him? Rachel considered the question for a moment. Glenn told me this morning that Ryan is prepared to cooperate, which is the only intelligent move he has left. Full cooperation and voluntary restitution are the best mitigation he can offer at this stage. She paused. Whether that's enough depends on decisions being made by people who are not us. Lauren nodded. She did not feel satisfaction at the image of Ryan cooperating under pressure. She did not feel the specific pleasure that people sometimes imagine when they think about a wrongdoer finally facing consequences. What she felt was closer to distance, like looking at something through the wrong end of a telescope. Ryan's situation had become something that existed in another frame from her life, something that was still technically connected to her story, but no longer inside it. She was already somewhere else. The firm she had decided that morning needed her attention on 2 specific client relationships that had been slightly neglected during the past 2 months of legal preparation. She had a hire to finalize in the analytics division. She had the quarterly board meeting in 3 weeks that would require a presentation that was both honest about the recent security vulnerabilities in company controls and confident about the remediation Daniel's team had implemented. She had things to do, real things, things that were hers. She stepped into the elevator and pressed the lobby button. The doors closed. The week that followed moved quickly the way weeks do when you are rebuilding something that was damaged, and the rebuilding requires all of your attention and all of your energy and leaves very little room for retrospection. Daniel presented his internal audit findings to the firm's board on Wednesday. The presentation was 63 slides and 3 hours long and left no ambiguity about what had happened, what had been remediated, and what safeguards were now in place to prevent any similar access vulnerability in the future. The board was shaken. They were also ultimately satisfied with the transparency and the thoroughness of Lauren's response to the situation. The board chair, a retired banker named Thomas Aldridge, who had been on the board since the firm's early days and had known Lauren's father slightly through a professional connection, stayed after the meeting ended and waited until the other board members had filed out. "Lauren," he said. She looked up from her papers. "Your father would have handled this exactly the same way," he said, "without drama, without excuses, by showing the documentation and letting it speak." Lauren looked at him for a moment. "Thank you, Thomas," she said. He nodded once, put on his coat, and left. She sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes, after that just sitting with the quiet and the faint hum of the building around her, and the knowledge that something she had been afraid of for months. The firm's reaction, the board's trust, the professional perception of what had happened under her roof had been met and survived. The new apartment by Friday of that week had furniture in all the right rooms. The books were unpacked. The kitchen had actual food in it rather than takeout containers and coffee supplies. Sandra had come over on Thursday evening and they had ordered pizza and opened a bottle of wine that was not particularly expensive, but was exactly what Lauren wanted, and they had sat on the new couch and talked for 4 hours about everything except Ryan Mitchell. They talked about Sandra's daughter, who had just been accepted to graduate school in Portland. They talked about a trip they had been planning for 5 years and never taken to Portugal, and whether it was finally time to actually book it. They talked about the book Lauren had been trying to read for 3 months and kept putting down because there had always been something more pressing. They talked about Lauren's father, about the specific way he used to laugh, about the trip the three of them had taken once to Wisconsin when Sandra had joined Lauren to visit him for a weekend, and how he had made them both omelets at 6 in the morning because he believed strongly that breakfast should be taken seriously. At one point, Sandra looked at Lauren over her wineglass and said, "You look like yourself again." Lauren thought about that. "I feel like myself again," she said. "I forgot how much space I take up when I'm not managing someone else's needs." "You take up a lot of space," Sandra said warmly. "It's one of the best things about you." Lauren laughed. The week after that, the IDFPR formally notified all 4 investors of the scope of their inquiry. 2 of the investors had already begun coordinating with their attorneys on civil recovery claims. One of the investors, a private equity manager named William Cho, who had committed $200,000 based on Ryan's pitch, called Lauren's office directly and asked to speak with her personally. She took the call. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, "I want to tell you directly that I do not hold you responsible for what happened. I did my own due diligence, and I should have verified the authorization independently. That is on me." "I appreciate that, Mr. Cho," Lauren said. "I want you to know that my firm's position is full cooperation with your counsel and with the regulatory process. If there is documentation my team can provide that assists your recovery claim, we will provide it." "That is generous," he said. "It's appropriate," Lauren said. "You were defrauded using my name. I have a responsibility to help correct that, even if I wasn't a party to it." There was a brief pause on the line. "Your reputation in this industry is well earned," William Cho said. "I hope the outcome of all this reflects that." Lauren thanked him and ended the call. She sat with it for a moment. She thought about Ryan, who had used her name like a tool, who had affixed it to documents and conversations and pitches as a way of borrowing credibility he had never built and could not build on his own. She thought about what it meant that people like William Cho had believed in her name enough that Ryan's theft of it had actually worked, She thought about how strange it was that the same reputation Ryan had exploited was the thing now insulating her from the full fallout of his exploitation. She had spent years building something real. Ryan had spent years pretending to, and the difference between those two things was now carved into the official record of the state of Illinois. 2 weeks after the hearing, Glenn Farber submitted Ryan's formal cooperation agreement to Rachel's office. It was accompanied by a complete accounting of every asset Ryan could document that had been purchased with funds connected to Lauren's accounts, and a voluntary restitution commitment covering the NB Creative Solutions transfers. The Patek Philippe watch was on the list. Ryan had returned it along with 17 other items before the list was even formally requested. Lauren received the inventory in a document from Rachel's office. She read through it with the same careful attention she gave every document. When she reached the watch, she paused. She thought about the dinner where she had given it to him. She thought about how she had said simply, "I saw it and thought you'd like it." She thought about what she now knew about what he had been thinking on the other side of that table. She closed the document. She called Rachel. "The watch," she said. "Yes," Rachel said. "I don't want it back," Lauren said. "Whatever the process is for liquidating returned assets and directing them to the restitution pool, use that. I don't want anything from that list." Rachel paused for a moment. "Lauren, some of those items have significant value." "I know," Lauren said. "Use the value for the restitution. I have what I need. I don't want anything that was in that part of my life sitting in this one." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Understood." And that was the end of that. The items were sold. The proceeds were incorporated into the restitution fund. The watch was purchased by a collector in Michigan who had no knowledge of its history and would probably never know it. Lauren did not think about it again. What she thought about in the weeks that followed was the future. Specifically and practically, and with the focused attention of someone who has reclaimed their own time and is acutely aware of the value of what was almost lost. She thought about Portugal. She called Sandra and told her to start looking at dates. She thought about the book she had not finished and picked it up again and finished it in 4 days. She thought about the firm about the next 5 years, about the analytics division hire she had finalized, and the new client relationship in Ohio she had been nurturing for 3 months that was finally ready to formalize. She thought about her father. She thought about what it meant to have almost given away the thing he left her and then found her way back to it. She thought about the woman she had been when she was standing at his grave, making a promise to honor what he had built by building something real of her own. She had nearly broken that promise without fully realizing she was doing it. She had not broken it. And the distance between those two outcomes was not luck. It was the decision made in an empty apartment in the early hours of a morning she would remember for the rest of her life to finally stop being afraid of what leaving would cost her and start understanding what staying was costing her instead. Lauren Mitchell had not won something. She had returned to herself. And that, as it turned out, was the only thing she had ever really needed to find. Part 5. The Woman Who Chose Herself. 3 months after the hearing, Lauren Mitchell did something she had not done in 4 years. She took a full week off, not a week where she checked her email every 2 hours and called Marcus from a hotel room to confirm meeting details. Not a week where she technically was not in the office, but was mentally running the firm from wherever she happened to be sitting. A real week. A week where she handed the operational reins to her deputy director, told Marcus to protect her calendar like it was a classified document, and boarded a flight to Lisbon with Sandra Reyes and a carry-on bag that did not contain a single work file. Sandra had booked the trip within 48 hours of Lauren calling her and saying the words she had been saying they would say for 5 years. "Book it. I mean it this time." Sandra had not waited for her to change her mind. On the plane somewhere over the Atlantic, Sandra looked at Lauren across the narrow aisle and said, "You look different." "Different how?" Lauren asked. "Less like you're bracing for something," Sandra said. Lauren thought about that. "I think I've been bracing for something since about 2021, she said. "It's going to take my shoulders a minute to figure out how to relax." "You have 7 days, Sandra said. "I suggest you start immediately." Lauren laughed, ordered a glass of wine, and opened the book she had started reading again, and was determined to finally finish. She finished it somewhere over the Atlantic 2 hours before they landed. It was the first book she had finished on a trip in 4 years. She noted that. Lisbon was warm and bright, and moved at a pace that felt like someone had gently turned down the volume on everything. Lauren and Sandra walked through narrow streets and ate at small tables outside restaurants where nobody knew who they were and nobody needed anything from them, and Lauren discovered that she had forgotten how to be anonymous in a pleasurable way. She had forgotten the specific lightness of being just a person in a city rather than a position, a reputation, a brand, a name on a building. She called Marcus once on the 3rd day, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to check in with someone back home, and Marcus was dependable in the way that very few people in her life had ever been. "How's everything?" she asked. "Perfect," Marcus said. "The Ohio client signed the contract yesterday. The analytics hire starts Monday. The board meeting materials are drafted and waiting for your review when you're back." He paused. "Lauren, everything is fine. Please stop working." She smiled. "I'm not working. I called to say hello." "Then hello," Marcus said warmly. "Now please hang up and go eat something extraordinary." She hung up and went and ate something extraordinary. On the 5th day in Lisbon, sitting at an outdoor cafe with Sandra, a small coffee and a pastry on the table between them, Lauren said something she had been turning over quietly in her mind for the past several weeks. "I keep waiting to feel angry," she said. Sandra looked at her over her coffee cup. "At Ryan." "Yes," Lauren said. "I thought by now there would be this wave of it. Like all the anger I didn't let myself feel while I was building the case would hit eventually. But it hasn't." "What do you feel instead?" Lauren thought about it honestly, the way she had learned in the years of her professional life to think about hard questions, not avoiding them, not rushing toward an answer, just sitting with the question until the real answer surfaced. "Sad?" she said finally. "Not sad for me. I got out. I made it out intact. Sad for the thing that could have been real if he had been a different person." She paused. "I don't think I was wrong to love him. I think I was wrong about who he was. And those are 2 different mistakes." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "That's a very mature thing to say about someone who kept a 14-page manual on how to manipulate you." "I know," Lauren said. And something about the way she said it made Sandra laugh, and then Lauren laughed too, and for a moment they were just 2 women at an outdoor cafe in Lisbon, laughing at the absurdity of the situation, and the laughter was real and unguarded, and exactly what both of them needed. When Lauren flew back to Chicago 8 days later, she felt something she had not felt in longer than she could precisely name. She felt rested, not just physically. Rested in some deeper register, as if the noise that had been running constantly in the background of her life had finally for a week been turned off, and now she had returned to it with the ability to hear which parts of it were necessary, and which parts she had simply been carrying out of habit. The first day back, she went to the office. She reviewed the Ohio contract. She sat in on the analytics hire's first day. She read through the board meeting materials Marcus had prepared and made 3 specific edits and approved the rest. She felt for the first time in years like someone who was running her company because she loved it, rather than because she needed it to justify the rest of her life. That distinction mattered more than she had realized. The second day back, she received a call from a number she did not recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something made her answer. "Ms. Mitchell," said a voice she did not recognize. "My name is Ethan Walker. I'm an attorney with Alderman and Cross. We've been retained by 2 of the investors in the Ryan Mitchell matter. I was hoping I might be able to speak with you briefly regarding some documentation questions." Lauren had heard of Alderman and Cross. They were a significant Chicago firm. She had crossed paths with them professionally several times over the years. "I can give you 10 minutes, Lauren said, "but anything substantive about the case should go through Rachel Carter's office." "Of course," he said, "and I apologize for the direct call. I tried Rachel's office first, and her assistant suggested I reach out to you directly for a preliminary conversation. I just have 2 clarifying questions about the timeline of events. It won't take long." He was clear and direct and did not waste a sentence. Lauren noticed that immediately. In her professional world, the ability to ask a precise question without unnecessary scaffolding was a quality she associated with people who were actually good at what they did. He asked his 2 questions. She answered them clearly. He thanked her and said someone from his office would follow up with the formal documentation request through Rachel's office. The call lasted 8 minutes. When it ended, Lauren sat for a moment with the specific awareness that she had just spoken to someone whose presence on the other end of a phone line had been in some uncategorizable way different from what she had become accustomed to. She did not follow that thought anywhere. She went back to the board materials, but she noticed it. 2 weeks later, Ethan Walker called again. This time, the call was also brief and also professional. But at the end of it, after the specific business question had been addressed, there was a beat of silence that had a slightly different quality from the silence at the end of a purely transactional exchange. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, "I know this falls well outside the scope of what we've been discussing, and I want to be upfront about that. But I'm going to be at the NAWA Financial Leadership Conference next month, and I believe you're on a panel. I was wondering if you'd be open to a conversation at some point during the conference, just professionally. There are some topics in the financial advisory space I genuinely value your perspective on." Lauren was quiet for a half-second. "Which panel have you seen me on?" she asked. "The Governance and Accountability in Financial Services panel," he said. "Friday morning. Your positioning on independent forensic oversight in private advisory firms is something I've been thinking about since I read the summary of your board presentation. It's relevant to some work we're doing." Lauren processed that. He had read the summary of her board presentation, which was not a public document, but had been circulated at a professional level in the governance and compliance community. "That presentation was fairly technical," she said. "I work in financial fraud recovery," he said. "Technical is preferred." She almost smiled. "I'll be at the conference," she said. "If our schedules align, I'm open to a conversation." "I appreciate that," he said, and he ended the call without extending it, without using the opening she had given him to schedule something more specifically or to press the advantage of her agreement. He simply accepted what she had offered and let it be enough. Lauren set her phone down. She thought about that for a moment. Then she went back to her work. The NAWA conference was held at a hotel downtown in late November. Lauren had spoken at it 3 times before. She was comfortable in the format and knew several of the other panelists personally. The panel itself went well, the kind of substantive conversation that reminded Lauren why she had originally built a career in financial consulting rather than something more immediately lucrative. She genuinely loved the thinking, the precision, the challenge of making complex systems legible to people who needed to make real decisions with real consequences. After the panel, she was standing with a cup of coffee and fielding the brief post-session conversations that always follow when a presentation goes well, when she saw Ethan Walker for the first time in person. She recognized him from the conference name badge before she had a face to put to the voice. He was waiting at the edge of the small crowd, not pushing forward, not making himself conspicuous. He caught her eye when the person she had been speaking to moved away, and he walked over with the straightforward ease of someone who has decided what they are going to do and is simply doing it. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, "Ethan Walker." "I know," she said. "I read your name tag." He smiled. It was a genuine smile, not a performed one. She noticed the difference immediately, the way you notice something when you have spent enough time around the performed version. They found a pair of chairs away from the main crowd and talked for 45 minutes. Not about the case, about governance structures and private wealth management and the specific problem of forensic access in family office fraud. About a paper he had co-authored the previous year on evidentiary standards in civil financial fraud recovery. About a paper Lauren had been thinking about writing for 2 years and had never started. He asked questions that showed he had actually thought about the topic before asking them. He disagreed with her on one specific point about regulatory jurisdiction and made his disagreement clearly and without apology, and with a reason she could actually engage with. She disagreed back. He listened. It was, Lauren would later tell Sandra, one of the better professional conversations she had had in years. Sandra, when she heard this, said nothing for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "Professional conversation." "Yes," Lauren said. 45 minutes. "Yes." After a panel about financial oversight. Sandra. "I'm just reflecting the facts back to you," Sandra said. "You spent 45 minutes having what you are describing as a professional conversation with an attorney who called you twice, read your board presentation, and waited at the edge of a crowd to speak to you. I am simply listening." Lauren was quiet for a moment. "He's easy to talk to," she said. "Good," Sandra said. "Easy is good. After 3 years of hard easy is extremely good." "I'm not looking for anything," Lauren said. "I know," Sandra said, which is often exactly when something worth finding tends to show up. Ethan sent a brief email the following Monday. He said he had enjoyed the conversation and attached a recent paper from his office on the exact regulatory jurisdiction question they had disagreed about with a specific page flagged that addressed her counterpoint. He said he had reconsidered his position and thought she was more right than he had been. He said nothing else. Lauren read the email twice. She read the flagged page of the paper. He was right that she had been more right. She wrote back to say so and to reference a footnote on page 12 that complicated both of their positions and that she thought was worth a conversation. He replied that afternoon. This exchange, low-key and substantive and conducted entirely through professional channels, continued for 3 weeks before Ethan Walker asked Lauren Mitchell in the last line of an otherwise completely professional email about forensic evidentiary standards whether she might be interested in having dinner sometime. He said, "Entirely your call and equally fine either way." Lauren read that line 3 times. Equally fine either way. She thought about what it meant to be asked something by someone who genuinely meant that the answer could go either direction and would not change how they behaved in the moments that followed. She thought about Ryan, who had asked questions that were not questions, requests that were not requests, and invitations that were never equally fine either way. She wrote back. She said, "Yes, somewhere with good wine and a menu that takes itself seriously but not too seriously." He replied within the hour with a restaurant suggestion and 2 possible dates. She picked one. She did not tell Sandra immediately. She held it for a few days, this small, quietly significant thing, before she was ready to share it. Not because she was hiding it, but because there are certain moments in your life that deserve a little private time before they become part of the story you tell other people. When she did tell Sandra, she called her on a Tuesday evening. "I have dinner with Ethan Walker on Thursday," she said. There was a pause. Then Sandra said, with a warmth that was completely unperformed, "Tell me everything." The dinner was at a restaurant in the West Loop that had exactly the kind of menu Lauren had described, serious about what it was doing, unself-conscious about it. They talked for 3 hours. The conversation moved between professional topics and personal ones with the natural ease of 2 people who are genuinely curious about each other rather than performing curiosity. He told her about his work, about why he had chosen financial fraud recovery after a decade in corporate law. He said it was because he found that the stories in fraud cases were always ultimately human stories about trust, misplaced, and systems that failed, and the specific damage that dishonesty did to real people's real lives. He said he wanted to be on the side of the people whose trust had been taken from them. Lauren listened to that with a specific, quiet attention. "That's an unusual reason for an attorney," she said. "Probably," he said. "Does it seem like too much?" "No," she said. "It seems honest." He asked her about the firm, about how she had built it, not in the impressed, slightly hollow way people sometimes asked about her success, as if they were admiring a trophy rather than a person. He asked about the decisions, the moments where she had not been sure, the things she would do differently if she could. She told him about her father. She did not do this often, not with people she had known for 3 weeks, regardless of how substantive the emails had been. But something about the specific quality of his attention, the way he listened without filling silences with reassurances or pivoting to his own parallel experience, made her willing to say the thing that was actually true rather than a presentable version of it. She told him about her father's hands, which had been rough from factory work and always warm. She told him about the promise at the graveside. She told him about almost losing what her father left her, not the money specifically, but the trust in her own judgment that made the money mean something. Ethan was quiet for a moment after she finished. Then he said, "You didn't lose it." "I almost did," she said. "Almost is not the same as did," he said. "You found your way back before it was too late. That's not luck. That's who you are." Lauren looked at him across the table. She thought about Ryan, who had studied her for 3 years and written 14 pages about what made her manageable. She thought about the difference between a person who studies you to find your weaknesses and a person who listens to you and tells you what he sees and lets you decide what to do with it. She thought about her father. She thought about the morning light on Lake Michigan from her new apartment. She said, "I think I'd like to do this again sometime." Ethan said, "I was hoping you'd say that." The weeks that followed moved forward with the steady, unforced rhythm of something that was allowed to be exactly what it was without being pushed into something else before it was ready. Lauren and Ethan had dinner again, then lunch, then a Saturday afternoon at a museum exhibit on economic history in America that turned into 4 hours of conversation so engaging that they missed the closing announcement and had to be gently informed by a staff member that the gallery was closing. Lauren told Sandra about each of these things. Sandra listened with the particular satisfaction of someone who has been quietly hoping for something for a long time and is watching it arrive. "Is he different?" Sandra asked one evening. "From Ryan? Actually different or just different on the surface?" Lauren thought about how to answer that honestly. "He doesn't need anything from me," she said finally. "Not my money, not my connections, not my reputation. When we're together, I never feel like I'm being assessed for what I can provide. I feel like I'm just there. Like being there is enough." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "Lauren," she said. "What? That's not a small thing," Sandra said. "That's actually the whole thing." "I know," Lauren said. And she did know. She knew it in the way you know things when you have experienced the full contrast. She had spent 3 years in the presence of someone who needed her for what she had. Now she was in the presence of someone who was simply interested in who she was. The difference was not subtle. It was enormous. It was the difference between being used and being seen. In December, 4 months after the hearing, Ryan Mitchell's attorney submitted the final restitution documentation to the court. The total figure was significant. It covered the personal transfers, the NB Creative Solutions payments, and a portion of the investor losses. The IDFPR case had moved forward through its regulatory track and resulted in formal sanctions that would follow Ryan Mitchell in any future financial industry activities. The investor civil claims were being resolved separately, with Ryan's cooperation and Lauren's firm's documentation serving as the foundation of each recovery. Ryan Mitchell did not go to federal prison. His cooperation, his voluntary restitution, and the nature of the specific charges ultimately resulted in a plea agreement on a single fraud count with a financial penalty, mandatory financial industry supervision, and probationary terms that would govern the next 5 years of his professional life. It was not nothing. It was not everything Lauren might have theoretically been entitled to seek. It was what the system produced when a case was built carefully, and a man, when finally cornered by his own documented history, chose cooperation over continued performance. Lauren was told about the final terms by Rachel on a Wednesday afternoon. She listened. She asked 2 clarifying questions. Then she said, "Is there anything else my office needs to do?" "Nothing," Rachel said. "It's over." Lauren took that in. "Thank you, Rachel," she said, "for everything, for the midnight call, for the patience, for being the kind of attorney who actually gives a damn about the person inside the case." Rachel was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had the warmth of someone who does not usually let it show this much. "You made it easy," she said. "You never let the emotion lead the evidence. You trusted the process. A lot of people in your position would have wanted to blow things up publicly, and you never did. That discipline is what made the outcome possible." Lauren thanked her again and ended the call. She sat in her office for a few minutes after that. She had, in the weeks and months since the hearing, thought very little about Ryan, not because she was suppressing it, but because he had genuinely stopped occupying space in her mind. The anger had never come in the wave she had expected. The grief had arrived quietly and left quietly the way grief does when it has been given room to do its work rather than being locked out of the house. What remained was not bitterness. What remained was just the fact of what had happened, filed appropriately in the past, no longer blocking the view of anything that mattered. She thought about him now briefly, not with satisfaction and not with sorrow, just with the simple acknowledgement that somewhere across the city he was living with the weight of what he had done and the consequences it had produced, and that was between him and whatever he was going to make of the rest of his life. She wished him with a sincerity that surprised her. Something she did not have a word for that was located between nothing and the best. Not happiness exactly, honesty. She wished him the capacity for honesty, with himself first, about who he was and what he was capable of and what that cost him. Because the thing Ryan had never understood, the fundamental error in all 14 pages of his careful analysis, was that Lauren's strength was never about the money. It was never about the company or the reputation or the professional standing. It was about knowing what was real. Ryan had taken almost everything he could reach. He had never been able to touch that. She stood up from her desk and walked to the window and looked out at Chicago in December, which was cold and gray and lit up with the particular kind of light that comes off a city in winter. Something between festive and industrial, something that is ugly and beautiful at the same time and is mostly just honest. She had built something in this city. She had almost lost it. She had built it back. She picked up her phone. She called Ethan. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said. Just that. Hey, like they had been talking every day for years, which they had not, but which felt possible, which felt like the kind of ordinary ease that is available in a life that is not held together by performance. "The case closed," she said. "Today, officially." "How do you feel?" he asked. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about all honest questions now. "Like it's been a long road," she said. "And I'm somewhere I recognize again." "Good somewhere?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Good somewhere." He said, "Do you want to get dinner tonight? We can celebrate closing it, or we can just eat and talk about something else entirely. Either way. Equally fine either way." He always said that. He always meant it. "Dinner," she said, "and something else entirely." She hung up. She gathered her coat and her bag. She turned off the office light. She passed Marcus on the way out, who looked up from his desk with the particular expression he reserved for moments when Lauren was leaving the office before 7, which was rare enough to register. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Everything's good," she said. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She waited. In the weeks and months and eventually years that followed, people who knew Lauren Mitchell's story would sometimes ask her what the lesson was, what the takeaway was, what you were supposed to do with something like that. She always thought carefully before she answered, because the easy answers were not the real ones. The easy answer was that you should protect yourself, that you should watch for the signs, that you should trust your instincts rather than override them with guilt. All of that was true, and none of it was sufficient. The real answer, the one she carried quietly inside the experience of everything that had happened, was simpler and harder to make into a lesson. She had confused being needed with being loved. She had confused someone's dependency on her with evidence of a real connection. She had let a man study her wounds and call it intimacy. She had allowed guilt to function as love because she had been told in 100 small ways over the years that a woman who led with her head rather than her heart was deficient in some essential way, and Ryan had found that wound and pressed it until she was paying him to do so. She had done all of that. That was true. And she had also, when the moment arrived, done the harder and more important thing. She had stopped. Not dramatically, not in a single moment of cinematic courage, in the incremental, unglamorous way that real change actually happens. One conversation. One decision to call Rachel at 11:30 at night. One lease signed on an empty apartment. One morning, standing at a window with a cup of coffee, watching the sun come up over a lake that had always been there and would keep being there regardless of who else was or was not in the room. She had chosen herself. Not instead of love, not in rejection of connection or partnership or the specific irreplaceable quality of being known by another person. She had chosen herself as the foundation, as the thing that had to be solid before anything else could stand on it. And from that solid place, she had built back everything she had nearly let go. The firm, the friendship with Sandra that had survived and deepened through the hardest months, the relationship with Ethan that moved forward slowly and honestly, and with the particular grace of two people who had each in their own ways learned the cost of taking things for granted. The mornings with coffee at the window and the view of the lake and the quiet, steady knowledge of who she was and what she had made and what it was worth. The famous text message stayed famous in the way that certain moments do when they capture something people recognize about their own lives. "No allowance this month. I want a divorce." "I already divorced you yesterday." People smiled at it because it was clever, but the woman who had sent it knew it was not a clever line. It was the moment the truth finally caught up with the performance. It was the moment a man who had spent 3 years studying her vulnerabilities discovered that the woman he thought he understood had spent those same years becoming someone he had never accounted for. It was the moment Lauren Mitchell stopped being someone else's strategy and started being entirely irreversibly and without apology her own.